Well, Prime Minister Stephen Harper is making history in Britain. He's the first Canadian PM in nearly 70 years to address the UK Parliament. Our National Bureau Chief David Akin is travelling with Harper and has this report from London.
Well, thanks very much. It is a big day. Not since William Lyon Mackenzie King back in May 1944 has a Canadian Prime Minister spoke inside these halls, inside the UK Parliament. And of course, back then it was the closing days of the Second World War, and hundreds of thousands of Canadian soldiers, sailors, airmen and airwomen had forged a bond in blood between Canada and the UK. And that was really the theme of Prime Minister Mackenzie King's speech in 1944, that close bond between the two countries. Prime Minister Harper also speaking today about the close bond, this time commercial bonds, trade ties between the two nations, a big theme for the Prime Minister's, not only for the Prime Minister's speech here in the UK, but for his entire visit. He's talking a lot about trade. Yesterday he started his European tour, announcing some new guidelines for mining companies in Canada. They'll be forced to publish what they pay to any government anywhere in the world, whether it's a government in Latin America or a First Nations government in Northern Canada. Mining companies, oil, gas, you name it, are going to have to tell people what they're paying to governments. This is seen as a big anti-corruption measure. Yesterday also, the Prime Minister had a private audience with Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. They have met several times during the Prime Minister's 7-year term as PM. They get along pretty well, we're told. In fact, yesterday they were scheduled to speak for just 25 minutes. In fact, their meeting went on for nearly an hour. So the PM and the Queen chatting for nearly an hour. Unfortunately, Palace protocol rules, they never really tell us what they're chatting about. But certainly the Prime Minister would have been passing on his good wishes for Prince Philip, the Queen's husband, who's in hospital and has some surgery coming up very soon. Now from here, the Prime Minister has finished his 2-day London trip. Off to Paris now. He's going to meet with French President François Hollande tomorrow, again talking about trade. And from there, it's off to Northern Ireland for the annual summit of G8 leaders, President Obama, Russian President Vladimir Putin. Once again, trade, also global security, Syria expected to be a big topic of conversation.
And that was our National Bureau Chief David Akin with the Prime Minister in London. Well, for more on the Prime Minister's visit in his historic address to the British Parliament, Jessica Hume joins us now live in the nation's capital. Jessica.
Hey, Alex, that's right. Big speech today by Stephen Harper. This is, as we've said, as you've said, he's the first sitting Prime Minister to address both houses of British Parliament in more than 70 years. So this is an honor for Stephen Harper, and this is an opportunity for him to add his name to a very exclusive list of other foreign heads of state who've been given the same opportunity to address British Parliament. So Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, Mikhail Gorbachev, Barack Obama. These are some of the other people who have been given this rare opportunity. So as David Akin mentioned, the ties between Canada and the UK are expected to play a pretty big role in his speech. But again, as David mentioned, not just the cultural kind of ancestral ties, but very much one focused on economy. We know that one thing Stephen Harper would like to do during his European trip is close a trade agreement with the European Union, though not all observers are convinced that that is indeed going to happen. But, you know, there is also a very close tie between Stephen Harper and David Cameron himself. The two men, they've described each other as friends. In terms of their conservatism, I think it's safe to say that they really are bosom buddies. So Cameron himself, he's actually addressed Canadian MPs. He did so in 2011. And in his speech to both MPs and senators, I should say, he urged Europe to follow the model of the successful Canadian economic model. So again, this is kind of a boost of confidence for his friend Stephen Harper. But you know, here on the other side of the pond, I think a lot of Canadian reporters are going to be wondering whether this European trip is going to be the opportunity that Stephen Harper has been looking for to really shirk a lot of that Senate and other scandals that he's currently dealing with. So the opposition has said that he's happy to flee Canada, is the way Tom Mulcair put it. And so we're waiting to see whether this really is an opportunity for him to change the channel. Now we know that he's met with the Queen, David Cameron as well, but then he's off to a G8 meeting in Northern Ireland, and we know that planned to coincide with his speech today. G8 protests. We're hearing about anti-pipeline protests, again, coinciding with Stephen Harper's speech. So these, of course, could amount to an unwelcome distraction. But I think that shouldn't take away from the fact that here with David Cameron, Stephen Harper really is surrounding himself with like-minded people. And I think it's worth mentioning that, as part of the Commonwealth, Canadian legal, what happens in the Canadian House of Commons does matter to the British Parliament. Earlier this year, the House of Commons, they signed a new bill that changes the assent to how succession happens within the royal family. So Canada agreed to UK legislative changes that would allow the firstborn child to take over the throne. So, we are deeply connected with Britain, and I think for Stephen Harper, this is an opportunity to get rid of some of the negativity that's been happening in Canada and really embrace his friends across the pond.
All right, Jessica, thank you for that.
You're welcome.